It's party time!
Gross.
The mid to late 2010s had a lot of reboots. Some turned out better than expected, while others did not fare so well, even in spite of my already low expectations. The 2016 reboot of the Powerpuff Girls was a strange show that was ultimately canned after only 3 seasons. It was a show that was plagued with issues from the beginning. You could say it was doomed from the start. The 1998 run of the Powerpuff Girls was created by Craig McCracken for Cartoon Network as a show for their Cartoons block. However, the creation of the show can be traced back to when he was attending CalArts in 1991, where he created a drawing of 3 girls that were inspired by the paintings of Margaret Keane as a birthday card for his brother. I am not joking. The next year, he would make them the main characters of his short film called Wabash Stew, calling them the Wabash Girls. This would later get picked up by Cartoon Network, but of course the name had to be changed to something that could actually be marketed for kids. So their names were changed to the Powerpuff Girls, and the can of Whoop-Ass that the professor added to the mix was changed to Chemical X. The show itself was well received for its humor, the cute characters, and was also criticized for being rather violent for a show rated TVY7. But this wouldn't be a video from Design Dungeon without going in depth on the art style of both versions and seeing what makes them tick. Craig McCracken, like his contemporaries, was influenced by the cartoons made by Hanna-Barbera and UPA. In the case of the Powerpuff Girls, the cast's heavily abstracted forms give them very distinct silhouettes. The girls themselves are these highly rounded, doll-like kids. The professor is composed of almost entirely sharp geometric shapes to contrast against them, while the rest of the cast are a variety of shapes and sizes that are expressive caricatures of people. The lines are thick, the environments are simplistic, and the cartoony characters make the action more acceptable for a TV Y7 show in the 90s. The 2016 reboot is weird in its art direction. While the thin lines are expected, they ultimately don't hamper the visuals too much, just make them a little off. The same could be said for the professor, save that every corner has been rounded off, violating his original design in a small, but nonetheless significant way. Where the art direction begins to break down is in the new characters who don't really look like they were built for the Powerpuff Girls. They look like characters who would be standing in the background of Star Vs. or Crake of the Creek. This gave the 2016 reboot a bit of an identity crisis. Compare it to the Dance Pants special. While that had shifted the style to a more Art Deco take, it was at least a unified style that was a progression of what came before. There was a mire of controversy that plagued the show along its run, such as none of the original voice actresses being called to reprise their roles for the girls, Mrs. Keene appearing to have gotten a double mastectomy, Miss Bellum being ejected from the series, leaving the mayor without a proper foil, the added love interest of Jared Shapiro, don't worry, we'll get to him, and the confusing mess that was Horn Sweet Horn. Of all the controversies, the one that is the most emblematic of this reboot as a whole is the multi-part special called The Power of Four. The 4th Powerpuff Girl, Bliss, is arguably the biggest wedge this show made in its audience because the premise of Power of 4 hinges on a massive retcon of the old show. That there was an original Powerpuff Girl called Bliss who couldn't control her powers and was estranged from the professor, never showed up until now. When making these sorts of changes to a story, there is a risk that the audience will drop their suspension of disbelief and lose interest in the show. Now, the Powerpuff Girls doesn't require much of the viewer given its lighthearted tone, but there is a line to be drawn when the writers retcon the show's original premise and insist that this is how it actually is, insisting that you pay no attention to the fact that the original girls were complete accidents and their powers weren't exactly under control when they were created either. I mean, it's not like there was an entire movie that centered around said scenario or something. Still, the show delivers on the comedic writing and energetic action. All is good, right? This show's humor and action are incredibly lacking, not just in comparison to its predecessor, but to its contemporaries. Let's start with the humor, which in the first season was riddled with slang and memes in some half-hearted attempt to be hip with the kids. Doing this never works for animated shows, not just because there's a chance that they will be misused in an embarrassing or unintended manner, but because by the time the show is done being animated, the meme has been dead and buried for some time. Funny shows don't need to use memes. They create them because of their humor being strong enough to stick with the viewer. I wish that something could stick with me from this show beyond how the girls constantly bicker between each other and the twerking. As for the show's action, it has been significantly toned down. Rarely do you see a blow actually make contact on screen, let alone see any teeth flying. When it comes to the violence in the Powerpuff Girls, having these cute little girls beating the tar out of villains was kind of the conceit of the show. Again, they were originally called the Whoop-Ass Girl. One would think that this is because of changing standards for the rating, but that only explains the lack of flying teeth. However, there is another show that is the same rating that has action, which is pretty engaging. OK KO, Let's Be Heroes. It had quite a lot of action while still being rated the same. In fact, a lot of the action was also pretty freaking good. Perhaps because it did focus on being an action comedy instead of focusing on drama and romance. Speaking of romance and broken themes, let's talk about Jared Shapiro. My issue with him isn't so much the allegations of him being a self-insert for the voice actor. No. It is simply his mere existence as a love interest for Blossom in general. When Craig made Powerpuff Girls, and many of his future works, there were no real love interests. Sure, there were characters that do get crushes from time to time, but they usually don't work out, much like Barry and Lord Dominator. As for the main protagonists, they tend to have very platonic relationships with other characters. While you can chalk it up to Craig's aversion to romance in his shows, but in truth, this aversion is a strength, especially for a show that was originally action-oriented. Romance can really hamper a show when handled wrong. In the Powerpuff Girls, it just seems very out of place. Even if their art style was cohesive and the writing was on point, alas, this show wasn't going to last long. While the early episodes had decent views, but given the issues mentioned before, viewership faded. Between Teen Titans Go getting the younger audiences and the revival of Samurai Jack's 5th season getting the older viewers of cartoons, there was barely any viewership after those early episodes. Then came 2017, where Teen Titans Go absolutely dominated the airwaves, climaxing in the absurdity that was the December marathon. In the second season, the show had taken some steps to rectify some of the problems, but by that time, only the truly dedicated were watching. The damage was done, the changes came too late, and by 2019, the show was unceremoniously cancelled. That will do it for this episode of Doom from the Start. It was initially going to be a design dungeon episode, but when I looked into it, the more I thought it would be better suited as this format, since barely of any of the new designs stood out. That said, if you want me to cover the original series as a proper design dungeon episode, leave a comment down below, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications for any of my new videos that should be coming out soon. Yeah, dang it, Stargazer. Like, Star, please, just watch BNA. I want to do a crossover with Tonekit, okay?